Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Paul. Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thanks for having me on the show today, Gleb. I am Paul Sephton, and I work at Jabra. I look after our brand communications, and amongst other things, that includes a lot of the first-party research that we have been conducting since the start of the pandemic, looking into hybrid work and future of work trends.
And so talking about that first-party research, I know you just released an interesting new study on remote work communication. Tell me a little bit more about the study and what you found.
So I think, as you mentioned, for the past few years, we've been looking at a lot of first-party research on what people are looking for from the future of work. But there are often some things that people don't necessarily know they can tell us, and that's the biological side of working. And so we wanted to look at doing more of a psychology-based piece of research to look more into the behavioral elements of how you and I might interact in an online environment and how technology might impact the way in which we're interacting based on our ability to hear and see each other clearly. So we teamed up with the London School of Economics, and they have one of the world's leading behavioral labs, and we decided to conduct a piece of research that was really going to dive deeper into understanding the way in which humans interact and the impact of technology on that.
Excellent. So thank you for giving the outline. What were the key takeaways from your findings?
So the way in which we set up the study, which I think is worth outlining, is we put people in different types of meeting room environments. And we had varying technology setups. And so we had people in in-room environments where there were 4 people in a conference room like you or I might take if we were in a formal office setting. And then we had remote participants, because we know that the predominant mode of working is going to be hybrid, where some people are in the room and some people are out of the room. So we used various technology setups and then tracked people using a range of biological measures and then post-research experiment interviews. And we found a lot of interesting results from that in terms of how the different technologies that we put into a room impacted the way in which people then interacted or felt about each other after that meeting. So if we were to look at some of the highlights, I think the first thing that we noticed, which is worth stating outright, is that people preferred face-to-face meetings. I think we've known this for some time, that as much as hybrid work is likely the predominant future of work, there is still some type of face-to-face, in-person quality that just can't be replicated when you are in a hybrid, in a remote, or in an online environment. And then after that, what we noticed was that different technologies had different impacts on the way in which people felt about each other. So what I mean by that is when everyone was using professional technology, so a professional video bar in the meeting room, and then a headset and professional personal webcam in the remote environments, we saw that people left those meetings with higher engagement scores, higher qualities of input, higher perceived expressiveness, overall quality of engagement, higher trust ratings. I think one of the things we know about being in person, and particularly the call back into the office that we see many leaders calling for, is that they just say that the trust levels in remote environments cannot match what you get from an in-person environment. And what we noticed was that while face-to-face might still be the preferred method for a lot of people, the technology you use in an online environment does ultimately make a really big difference to the quality of the interaction that people have and the way they feel about their fellow colleagues.
That makes sense. So that reminds me, so I've helped 26 organizations by now figure out their hybrid and remote work plans. And what I tell them when doing training for their managers is that there's kind of 3 buckets of communication. And I encourage them to try to push communication into the lowest bucket while still accomplishing the goal of the communication. The 3 buckets, the first bucket, the most clear, the most trust building, the most relationship building bucket is in person and synchronous, because you can see each other's body language fully, You can hear each other's tone of voice fully. You're there in the room, you have more energy, you build up trust, but that's the highest cost because you have to be in the office, you have to do the commute, and you have to coordinate each other. Then the next one, the more moderate level, is virtual and synchronous, where that's kind of what you're talking about, where some people are in the room, maybe it's fully remote, everyone's remote, or maybe some people are hybrid, some people are in the room, some people are coming in virtually. That's less clear and less relationship building, but still better than asynchronous. And the third bucket is asynchronous. And there within the third bucket, there's text, there's but a little bit more complex, and at least giving somebody language is like a video message or an audio message. And I try to encourage them to push communication again into the lowest cost bucket while still achieving the goal of the communication. I'm curious about what you think of that sort of approach in terms of considering technology costs and trade-offs.
Yeah, I completely agree with the outlook overall. I think the thing which we noticed when we shifted to remote environments is that when we're in person, like you say, the quality of that interaction is really high because we have so many senses we can rely on to pick up on body language, like you mentioned, micro expressions on someone's face, a lot of other senses that we get in person, which when we're in an online environment, we're just able to rely on sight and sound. And so if we can enhance the ability of people to see and hear as clearly as possible in those online environments, we've now been able to prove that there's really a tangible impact on the level of communication and engagement that you can have with people in that type of setup. I think we know that, as I mentioned, the future of work is going to be one in which people are rarely always able to be in the same room. Even if we had a company on site and 5 out of 6 people on a team were able to make it in, we see employees wanting the flexibility and sometimes needing it to not necessarily be able to make it in. And so there'll almost always be that online element. And if you can maximize the ease with which people can communicate and almost bring it as close to in person as possible by pulling down some of those barriers, making sure that people are feeling confident, feeling like they can see and be seen and hear and be heard, then overall, you'll maintain that productivity across any type of globalized workforce, across any type of hybrid work setup, and still benefit potentially from those in-person meetings as and when you call them, but know that you've set your teams up for the most productive level of communication they can achieve with the right technology, no matter where they're needing to work from.
That makes sense. I'm curious specifically to dive into the technology for hybrid meetings. So when I train managers, leaders on this topic, for them to then set norms for their teams, I encourage them to have everyone bring laptops to a hybrid meeting and talk to the laptop so that people in the room are going to be just looking at everyone who is present, which is if everyone brings laptops, then they're all seen on the video screen, including people who are remote, so that they're communicating to all the people who are there at the same time. So they're talking to the screen, they're not kind of leaning to the side and talking to others around them, and that people who are coming in remotely are feeling fully included, as well as to use the kind of tools that are available through remote techniques like chat and emojis and so on. What are your thoughts on the kind of technology? That's what I do. I'm curious on what your thoughts are on the best practices, and I'm not a technology specialist. So what are your thoughts on the technology best practices for hybrid meetings?
I think you raise a good point. It's around what we might consider pixel real estate. The fact that when we were all remote and dialing in, everyone had the same amount of real estate on the screen. No one was more or less dominant. And then when we shifted back into an environment where some people were in the office and some people were still working remotely, you suddenly had this imbalance where maybe if you were in a meeting room, there were 4 people huddled around a laptop camera, and anyone who was remote would struggle to see who was in the room, struggle to pick up on the in-room dynamics. And there was a loss of meeting equity. And so one of the tests that we just did at the London School of Economics Behavioral Labs looked at if everyone in the meeting room has their own individual video feed, as though you might imagine if you were dialing in from a remote location. The remote participants had a perceived 56% increase in the quality of input from those people in the room. So I think everyone's at a different level of technology maturity at whatever company they're at. And for some, it might be that you want everyone to dial in off of their individual laptops. And that's a great solution. And so that everybody can show up with the equal amount of screen share. But we're in a position now where there are different types of video bar technologies that actually enable facial detection and then individual feeds to be created. And so that instead of having one widescreen view of everybody in a meeting room, you're ending up with individual streams and feeds of people so that everyone can get that same amount of space to show up in that call, be seen and be heard. So I think there are quite a few practices, like you say, around using reactions, using emojis, being able to contribute to a meeting. And platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams have really enabled a deeper level of interaction in these online environments. But there are also, thankfully, now video and audio solutions that are able to advance that connectivity and ability for people to fully show up on an online call. So I think if you combine technology best practice with a cultural or leadership sort of framework on how meetings are governed and how people interact in them, and maybe for one company that's around everyone using their individual laptops, and in other instances it's around raising a hand virtually through your meeting platform rather than cutting someone off mid-sentence. But there's a good range of options available for leaders to put into place these days around meeting best practices.
Excellent. Now, as we're coming to the end of the interview, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the future. We are having more conversations about augmented reality and virtual reality technology solutions. How do you think these will impact meeting presence and meeting engagement in the future?
I think it's a really exciting time from that perspective. We'd maybe come from a position or a way of thinking where in-person meetings were best. And as technologies are advancing more and more, I think we'll move into a space where you're almost at a disadvantage taking a meeting without any technology in a room. So you might all end up being in the room together, but you want that technology there because it will, like you say, augment some elements of it, potentially bring people more wholeheartedly into a room than they would otherwise be able to be in present day environments. And there's also the potential for tech to handle things like transcriptions for us in meetings, to send out meeting minutes or notes afterwards, for answers to be available in real time to questions that come up in a meeting. And I think with generative AI, augmented technologies, and a lot of the things we're seeing in terms of the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be at a point where meetings in online environments are more productive than meetings that are, if I could call them, offline and just face-to-face.
Well, that's a bold prediction. Well, thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. I appreciate you coming on the show. That was very helpful.
Thanks for the time, Dr. Gleb.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show.